Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Daily Devotional. So, for the first couple of days of this week, I wasn't feeling too well, but my family and I are under quarantine. We're in day 5 of our 10-day countdown at this point. It feels like it's been a month, uh, but uh, but everybody's doing well. I appreciate all the prayers and everybody asking how we're doing. But everybody's fine. So far, the kids have only shown mild symptoms, headaches, and allergy-like symptoms. So far, Elizabeth and I and Tori are the ones who haven't yet caught it or are showing any symptoms or anything. So far, so good on that end. So I appreciate everybody's thoughts. I am feeling better today, and so we're going to have our daily devotional again today. Our daily devotional comes from an article that was published back on July 30th. And the title of it is Critical Race Theory Debate Divides Christians. All of us have intrinsic value. Obviously, critical race theory, there's a lot being talked about it in our society right now, and you can certainly look up critical race theory and kind of look at the basic tenets of it. Depending on which definition people use, the idea of critical race theory is the idea that racism is something that is embedded within systemic structures, within our laws, in our government, and so forth. And in certain facets of critical race theory suggests that white people should be shamed for being what they are, and there are some different elements to that as well. Now, obviously, critical race theory tends to slide in under the more political type of arena, I guess you could say. But the fact that this article is acknowledging that it's being debated by quote-unquote Christian churches, that I thought it was interesting to look at. The debate over critical race theory is in schools and government, but now it's starting to infiltrate and divide the Christian church. At a heated school board meeting in Fort Worth, Texas recently, remember this is back July 30th, critical race theory was on trial, but it was God who many speakers used as a witness. On the one side are those opposed to CRT like Danielle Buck, a parent who said, "I believe in what God says in the Imago Dei, that all of us have intrinsic value regardless of the color of our skin. We have all been created in the image of God." Imago Dei is Latin for the image of God. There is no the Imago Dei. It's just or Dei anyway. It's the concept of the being created in the image of God in the Old and New Testaments, for that matter. Then there are pastors like Ryan Price who support it. He says, "In the church we have a saying, keep your hand on the plow, you're plowing hard ground. The roots of racism and inequity are deep, more reason to hold on tight and keep at it for the sake of truth, humanity, and unity." Again, it just kind of, like little blurbs, not really going in depth to describe or talk about some of the details there. But regardless, critical race theory has begun to cause fissures in evangelical circles. In 2019, the Southern Baptist Convention, one of the most conservative Christian denominations, adopted Resolution 9, which accepted some of the tenets of CRT as a tool to understand how race has and continues to function in society. But theologian Voddie Baucham, author of the book Fault Lines, and Voddie Baucham is African American, said many efforts like this, though well-intentioned, ignore how CRT clashes with Christianity on core issues. Critical race theory is at odds with Christianity because it takes the problem of racism out of the individual heart and puts it out there somewhere in systems and structures, said Baucham, who is African American. And he reminded Christians that Christ came to redeem us from our sin, and our sin is in here, which I'm guessing he's kind of pointing to the human heart, and not out there. He talks a little bit more about kind of the origins of CRT and so forth, and some of what the resolution from the Southern Baptist Convention said. In his book, Baucham warns of a looming catastrophe within evangelicalism evangelicalism, as CRT and other social justice movements oftentimes use the language of faith to promote the ideology, like saying slavery is America's original sin. I thought this was an interesting point. So when people start talking about original sin, they're stepping into a theological lane, he said. And if you're going to talk about original sin, now keep in mind original sin is the Catholic concept that all people are born in sin. Every person, even babies, are born in sin because of Adam and Eve's original sin. And then therefore, as soon as we're born, that sin is then inherited. It's then passed down. And as a direct result, this is why babies have to be baptized in the Catholic Church. And if you're going to, of course, original sin is not something that is supported in the Old or New Testaments for that matter. Now, if you're going to talk about original sin, then there has to be an answer to how we're forgiven for that original sin. And the great irony of race theory and anti-racism is that there is no forgiveness there. You just have to perpetually do the work of anti-racism, and you never get to a point where that work is finished. There's no forgiveness, there's no salvation, because there is no Savior. And I thought that was a pretty good point, that people who say that slavery is America's original sin, well, how are you saved from that? How are you forgiven from that? The idea of original sin is you have to have somebody who can take that sin away, and again, original sin isn't supported in the scriptures, but his point is valid. That in the end, how are you supposed to make up for that? How you have has the guilt and the responsibility for the sins of the past been passed down? And I think that's his point, is that there shouldn't be any such concept of original sin when it comes to racism and so forth. He's not commenting on whether or not original sin is a true situation in the religious theological realm, but regarding CRT and regarding racism and so forth, that just shouldn't be how people view slavery from the 1800s and so forth. So the way the article ends, though, it says, but one of the reasons that Christians are drawn to CRT is because it sounds like the things they believe in. Tom Plumley, senior minister of First Christian Church in Fort Worth, told the school board members how he supports CRT and said to keep teaching his grandchildren the truth and the humanity of all their neighbors. It's not about helping them feel bad about being white, but helping them learn ways all of us can someday overcome every evil through truth, humanity, and unity, he said. Balcom, this is the African-American fellow who wrote this book about CRT and so forth, that is saying there's danger there. Balcom said the irony is that both sides of the divide are reading the same Bible, looking for divine guidance for the same human problem. So I thought this was an interesting article for a couple of reasons. The original sin was kind of an interesting point that he made. But more broadly speaking, when it comes to the tenets of CRT, critical race theory, when it comes to addressing racism in the church, and I didn't talk really about the Southern Baptist Convention and what they adopted, resolutions and so forth. The final part of the final resolution that they made, whereas critical race theory and intersectionality alone are insufficient to diagnose and redress the root causes of the social ills that they identify, which result from sin, yet these analytical tools can aid in evaluating a variety of human experiences. And if we're being fair, when you take a look at what some things that people are saying, certain elements of what they're saying about kind of putting yourself in the shoes of some of the experiences that people have had, particularly people of color, and understanding where they're coming from on some things, you can kind of see where some Christians would feel compelled to say, okay, well, there is some value of considering these things. Not saying that they're accepting all of them, but that there's some value in at least considering where they're coming from on some of this. And I think any time you're dealing with uh, experiences of other people, anytime you're dealing with particularly even from a political perspective, trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and trying to understand where they're coming from and understand why are they proposing this bill, what is it that they're seeking, what is the end goal here, and then compromising or working to a common goal. That's how politics should work. Unfortunately, in our current society, in our country, that's not really how it works right now. There's a lot of other stuff going on. But in the end, that's how things should work. You should be able to identify a common goal, and even though different sides have maybe different ways of trying to achieve that goal, maybe there is some good you can take from their thoughts, good you can take from your own thoughts, and put them together to find a solution. When it comes to things like racism and so forth, again, this is more in the what the critical race theory and so forth is dealing more in a political realm. Maybe it crosses into ideological, I suppose, but from a biblical perspective, I think it's interesting that you have churches that are having debates on things like this, and whether or not critical race theory should be included in things that they obviously that they teach and stand for. I mean, this is the Southern Baptist Convention that is discussing this critical race theory, and so all of this kind of presents a situation where we, as members of the Lord's body, we see these things take place. And of course, we've had lessons on racism and what the Bible says about racism. And obviously, when we look at Scripture, all people are created with a soul, from the conceived baby to doesn't matter what color skin, to what gender you are. Everyone is given a soul, and that soul, by just the nature of having been given a soul by God, that soul has value. And I think that is something that is particularly important, especially, this is something that is mentioned earlier. Let's see, where is it? Yeah, I believe in what God says in the image of God, that all of us have intrinsic value regardless of the color of our skin. We've been created in the image of God, and that's true. The fact that we have a soul given to us by God, the fact that Jesus came to die for every soul, to give it every opportunity to us to have forgiveness of sins, that gives us value. That shows that we have value from God, and therefore we should have value to each other. The fact that the means by which identification is made of racism, and whether or not these things are systemic in governmental structures or in societal hierarchies or whatever, that's obviously up for debate. But it's important, I think, that we, as members of the Lord's body, that we keep it in the same realm as where Mr. was Bauckham, Vadi Bauckham, this is African-American fellow who wrote this book, Fault Lines. I really like what he says right here. Critical race theory is at odds with Christianity because it takes the problem of racism out of the individual heart and puts it out there somewhere in systems and structures. In the end, I think he's absolutely right that when it comes to racism, and by racism, for our purposes today, we're defining racism as the view that a certain race or skin color, by nature of that skin color, makes you better than or of more value than anybody else. And obviously the Bible doesn't teach that. And I don't know of any Christians any members of the Lord's body that actually believe that that's true. Or that actually believe that in racism, or believe that one skin color is better than another. No one that I know questions for a second that God died for, Jesus died for people with white skin, people with black skin, people with brown skin, people with red skin. It doesn't matter. Okay, Christ died for everyone. And so it doesn't matter what their background is. It doesn't matter what society or customs they're from. What matters is what their heart is and whether or not they're willing to submit and obey God. And that being the case, I think that he kind of gets to the root of this, is that people who believe that certain skin colors or certain races are inherently better than others, that's not really an issue of outside structures. That's an issue of the heart. And if that's the case, if this is an issue of the heart, then it's the heart that has to be addressed. And the thought process is, if, okay, I'm not saying that there is, but if elements of critical race theory that believe in inherent structural racism, if that's true, if there are certain hierarchical or structural elements that are racist in and of themselves, then they should be addressed automatically as individuals change their hearts. Efforts to change the structures themselves aren't going to do a thing. That's not going to change it. It's not going to fix anything if people's hearts aren't fixed. Which it kind of goes to the point to say, and as much as sad as it is, racism is always going to be a problem. Racism has always been a problem. Okay, I think that some people are under the mistaken impression that slavery in America was kind of the first or the start of racism, and that is absolutely not true. Racism has always been a part of the human life. It has been around almost as long as man has. That's not to say that it excuses it in any way, but it's to say that people who have hearts that aren't right are always going to find ways and are always going to come up with ways to exalt themselves. And if we aren't prepared to deal with the heart, then we can deal with structures, we can deal with hierarchies, we can deal with societies all we want to. But if the heart isn't right, it's not going to change anything. It's not going to fix the key components. Can we make things better? Sure, we can make things better. And can we try to help people as best we can to come to an understanding that all people deserve to be treated with respect? Absolutely, we should. But in the end, you cannot change or regulate a person's heart by laws, by changing structures, by shaming them. You can't do that. A person changes their heart themselves. And that's really kind of where the concept of racism and the idea of teaching Christ and Christianity and evangelism are very common. That's a very common thing. You're not going to change somebody who's a racist simply by telling them they should change. They have to want to change. And the same thing is true about becoming a member of the Lord's body or becoming a Christian by being baptized to have for the remission of their sins. The understanding of becoming a Christian means a recognition of things that I'm doing wrong, things that I need to change and fix. And the only way that's going to happen, it's not something that you can institute within a structural hierarchy. It's not something you can regulate. It's something a person has to come to and realize on their own. You can help them, but they have to do it themselves. And I thought that was a very interesting take on the critical race theory debate. And again, I'm not speaking one way or the other for or against the concept of critical race theory. And again, a lot of it depends on how you define critical race theory. There's several different definitions, several extremes of critical race theory that are kind of around right now. But at least in broad terms, I think it's important to recognize that in the end, does God condone or does he approve of racism? No. The very fact that he sent his son to die, not just for Jewish people, okay, but for all people, not just for certain skin color people, but for all people, shows that all people have the same value. All people have the same value to God. And if all people have the same value to God, then all people should have the same value to us. All right. This is just a thought that I came across when I saw this article, and I've had it saved for a while, obviously, but it was one of those things that I was like, that's really interesting points there. So just something to think about, something for us to consider, and certainly for us to be able to when critical race theory is being debated and so forth, kind of to avoid the whole political debate of it, just say, hey, racism. We can have the debate, we can have the discussion about whether or not racism, there's certain inherent racism aspects within government or within certain structures. That's fine, but in the end, even if you fix that, is that really going to fix anything? I mean, until people fix their hearts, racism is still going to exist. So it's not going to really change anything. All right. Our next day of the devotion will be tomorrow, Lord willing, at 6:30. Hope to see you all then. Thanks, everybody.